Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. Today we continue our study of the second book of Kings. We are at the final chapter, 25, that is Parak Hey. It is painful to read this chapter, but it is the ending of what was once such a promising kingdom, the kingdom of David, the kingdom of Solomon, and some of the other great kings that we could remember that accomplished great things. We remember the king of Jehoshaphat, who tried to bring peace between the north and the south. We remember the king Chizkiyahu, who was able to bring the people back to God and stand up to the Assyrians. We remember Yoshiyahu, who tried at the last minute, near the end of the kingdom of Judah, to try to at least one last desperate attempt to bring the people back to God. There were proud moments. However, the general trend was a downward trend, a trend towards idol worship, a trend towards oppression, a trend towards corruption. Reading through the books of the prophets of the time, especially the book of Jeremiah, who was here at this time, the criticisms he had of the people and the corrupt lifestyles that they had built brought this inevitable destruction. So there's no it's painful to read, but we have to read it. So Vayihi, and it was, this is verse 1, Bishnas Hatchias, in the 9th year, L'molcho, of his reign, B'chodesh ha'asiri, in the 10th month, Be'asor lachodesh. This is the famous fast of the 10th day of Teves, Asar b'Tevet, which is the 10th month, the 10th day, which is the day Ba Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, Hu v'kol chelo, he and his entire armies, Al Yerushalayim, came to Jerusalem, Vayichan Aleha, and he camped around Jerusalem. Vayivnu Aleha doyek saviv, and he built a siege wall around the city to make sure that nobody could escape. Now the people under Tzidkiyahu were now trapped. The reason for this fast day to this day, that Jews keep this day as a fast day, is because of this event that happened on this day. Vatavo ha'ir b'matzar, and the city was under siege ad ashteas reishana, until the 11th year L'melech Tzidkiyahu, of the kingdom of Tzidkiyahu. So we're talking about a 3-year-long siege. B'tishol chodesh, on the 9th day of the month, Vayechazak ha'ir harav ba'ir, this would be the month of Tammuz, the 4th month of the year. The hunger gripped the city. There wasn't any food, any bread to eat for the people. Vatiboka ha'ir, so a breach was made in the wall, to break down the wall, presumably by the people inside to get out because of the horrific starvation. V'chol anshei ha'milchama, and all of the warriors, Halayla, ran out in the middle of the night, derech shar bein hachomosayim, through a gate between the two walls. I'm assuming these two walls are the city walls and the siege wall. Asher al gan hamelach, which is near the king's garden. V'kasdim alo ir saviv, and the Chaldeans, remember, are pretty much by this point one and the same as the Babylonians, right? They're allied with, and the Chaldean nation had been subsumed under the Babylonian nation. They're all really one. Vayelech, so they are camped around the city. Vayelech derech harava, and they ran in the direction of the Arava. So here they are running out towards the east, trying to escape during the night. Vayirdefucha, and they sensed the breach. So Vayirdefuchel kasdim, an army of the Chaldeans, ran after Achar Melech, chased after the king Tzidkiyahu. Vayasigu oso, and they reached him bi'arvot Yerecho, in the plains of Jericho. V'kol chelo nafotzu me'alav, and his entire army just scattered from with him. So they captured the king, and everyone just scattered in every direction to try to get away. Vayitvesu et hamelach, and they grasped, they took the king. Vayaluo so al melach Bavel Rivlasa. They took them to the king of Babylon, who at the time was in Rivla. So he was not present at the siege during the time of this attempted escape. Vayedabru ito mishpat, and he spoke with him, or they spoke with him, with the king, in judgment. In other words, how dare you rebel against the king? How dare you try to escape? How dare you treat the king this way, treat Nebuchadnezzar this way, if he was the one who put you into power, rebelling against the king who is ruling over you. And in judgment, they then punished him at Bnei Tzidkiyahu shachatu le'einav, in front of his eyes. They executed his children, his sons. V'et Einei Tzidkiyahu iver, and after witnessing this, they blinded Tzidkiyahu. Vayasreu b'nechushtayim v'avieu Bavel, and they tied him up in chains and brought him thus, blinded, after watching his family killed before him, to Babylon. And that was his punishment for his rebelliousness. Uvachodesh hachamishi b'shiva lachodesh. Now the king is gone. So on the 5th day, in the 5th month, that's the month of Av, on the 7th day of the month. Now, as we know, the day that we to this day mourn the destruction which we're about to read about, on the 9th day of Av, because as tradition has it, what we're about to read began on the 7th day and concluded on the 9th day. So Hishnas Tisha Esrei L'Melech Nebuchadnezzar Malach Bavel, which is the 19th year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. But Nebuzaradon Rav Tabachim, the head of the murderers, right? Eved Melech Bavel Yerushalayim. He was a servant. In other words, he was the military head for a general for the king of Babylon. He came to Jerusalem. So he entered the city. So the month prior, Tzidkiyahu tried to escape. The soldiers tried to escape. Now there's maybe some people left in the city, but not enough to defend it anymore. So he entered the city on the 7th day of the month of Av. And what did he do? Vayisrofet Beit Adonai, he burned the temple of God. V'et Beit HaMelech, he burned down the palace. V'et Kol Botei Yerushalayim, and all of the houses in Jerusalem. V'et Kol Beit Gadol, any large house, any house of significance. Soraf Be'esh, he burnt in flame. V'et Chomot Yerushalayim Soviv, and the walls of Jerusalem all around. Notetzu Kol Chel Chastim Asher Rav Tabochem. They all of the armies of the Chaldeans that were there, together with the Rav Tabachim, which literally means the chief murderer. This is the scripture, the writer of the Book of Kings, the prophets, using the language of Rav Tabachim to refer to Nebuzaradon. At this point, this was just gratuitous murder. The king was gone. The government was gone. The destruction of the city wasn't necessary, but it was being done just to completely subdue the people of Judah. And whoever remained from the nation that remained in the city, and those that ran, the Noflim, it's usually, and the people that ran, the refugees that had ran to the king of Babylon in order to try to escape the destruction. And the remainder of the crowds of people that were there, Heglon Nebuzaradon Rav Tabachim. Nebuzaradon, the chief murderer, exiled them. So after burning down the city, destroying the city, destroying any structure of meaning in the city, the remaining people that survived, he sent into exile. Umidalat haaretz, but from some of the poorest of the poor, some of the beggars, Hishirav Tabachim, he did leave them there in the land, Lecharmim Uliogvim, in order to continue tending to the vineyards and the fields. So in other words, in order to keep this land productive for the Babylonian Empire, it didn't make sense to get rid of everyone and completely decimate the population. because you have all of these vineyards and grain fields that should be tended so that they can keep producing food for the kingdom. So some of the poorest of the poor he did leave there in order and told them, you guys are now in charge of taking care of this farmland. And the pillars of brass or copper that were in the temple of God, and the bases within which the pillars were stuck, and the copper the huge basin of water, or it's called the Copper Sea, which was built by Solomon, Asher Beves Adonai, that was in the temple of God. Shibru Kasdim, the Chaldeans broke it by Yesu and at Nechushtam Bavela, and they carried the metal back to Babylon in order to be reused to build new things. Viata Sirot, and all of the pans, Viata Yoim, and the spatulas or shovels, Viata Mizamrot, and the Viata Kapot, and the spoons, and all of the various snuffers. Those are things that put fires out. And all of the brass or copper, depending on how you translate Nechoshet, that were used in the temple, they took all of these vessels. Vieta machtot, and the pans, the fire pans, vieta mizrakot, and the basins, or the bowls that were used to collect the blood and pour the blood of the sacrifices. Asher zahav, those that were gold, of gold, Asher kesef, and those that were silver. Lokach rav tabachim, the chief of the murderers, took them with him. Ha'amudim shnayim, the pillars, and hayam ha'echad, and the one siva mechonot, and the bases, Asher asa Shlomo leveis Adonai, that Solomon had built in the temple of God. Lo hayam mishkal kol hakelim ha'ela. They were so large and so much that you couldn't even measure them. They weren't able to weigh them. They had no tools with which to weigh this tremendous amount of metal. Shemona esrei ama komas amuda echad. Each pillar was 18 amot, which would be about 27 feet, approximately. Maybe a little bit less, but that'd be about of cubits. 18 cubits would be about that, because each cubit is about 1.5 feet. A modern foot of 12 inches. V'choteret olav nechoshet, and its koteret, it's the capital on which was on top of it, was also made of brass. V'komat hakoteret shalosh amos. That was another 3 cubits. So we're looking at, instead of you're looking at 27 plus 4.5. You're looking at about 31.5 feet tall. Usivacha, and it's the meshwork, or the which was the decoration that was embroidered, not embroidered, that would be with cloth, but that was engraved upon it. Virimonim, and rimonim means pomegranates, but this would mean like balls that were kind of decorating the koteret, ala koteret saviv, which is the capital on top of the pole. Saviv hakol nechoshet. It was all made out of brass. V'cha'ela lamud hasheni al asavacha, and the same thing was on the second pillar. So there was 2 pillars just like this, just describing how grand they were, while it's telling us of their destruction, just in order to drive home the tragedy of what had happened. Vayikach rav hatabochim et Seroya kohen arosh, v'et Zefanyahu kohen mishnah, v'et sheloshet shomrei asaf. And the chief murderer took Seraya, who was the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and Zefanyahu, who was the second to the high priest, and 3 of the guardians of the doors. He took them. Umin ha'ir, and from the city, Lokach Seris echad, he took one of the chief head officers, Asher hu pakir al anshe ha'malchama, who was in charge of the warriors. So he took, in addition to those leaders, he also took the head general. V'chamisha anashim meiroi pnei hamelach asher nimtzu v'ir, and 5 people who were of those that were members of the king's council. V'et hasofer sar hatzava, and the scribe, who was the scribe of the general, the head general, Hamatzbi et Am Haaretz, the one who kept accounting of the armies and the numbers, V'shishim ish me'am haaretz, and 60 people of the land, Hanimtziim Bo'ir, that were found in the city, Vayikacho some Nebuzaradon Rav Tabachim, and Nebuzaradon, the chief murderer, took them, Vayolachosam al Melech Bavel Rivlasa, he took them to the king of Babylon, who was still at Rivla, which is the location where the trial of Tzidkiyahu took place and the punishment was meted out. Vayachosam Melech Bavel, Vayimisem Berivla Be'eretz Hamas. And the king of Babylon struck them down and put them to death in the land of Hamat. Vayigel Yehuda me'alad maso, and he exiled the people of Judah from their land. We're going to read this. This is going to end this podcast. We're going to read the last podcast for the second book of Kings in our next podcast, which is the tragic episode of the remaining people that remained after the exile and what happened to them. The story of Gedaliah ben Achikam. That's going to be what we read next. Thank you so much for studying this together. I know it's difficult to read. It's painful to read. It's hard to even talk about. It hurts. But it's history. It's what happened, and we need to learn these lessons. So thank you for studying together. I hope everyone has a wonderful day.